I saw you toss the kites on high above the birds about the sky, and all around I heard you pass like lady skirts across the grass. Oh, wind a-blowing all day long. Oh, wind that sings so loud a song. I saw the different things you did, but always you yourself you hid. I felt you push, I heard you call, I could not see yourself at all. Oh, wind a-blowing all day long. Oh, wind that sings so loud a song. Oh, you that are so strong and cold to blow, where are you young or old? Are you a beast, a field and tree, or just a stronger child than me? Oh, wind a-blowing all day long. Oh, wind that sings so loud a song.
Movie breaks down brains, neurons, and cognition. While Puho deciphers symbols, ancient traditions. In the lab or field, they're a force to reckon. Cracking codes, solving mysteries in every section. Movie with the data, charting human mind. Puho with the symbols, finding meaning in God. From the depths of thought to ancient runes, they're on a mission, making discovery soon. Together they tackle what's been misunderstood. Ruby and Puho, buddies in the neighborhood.
Something on the other side. We are all told that truth is merely a conclusion that can reliably be derived from some observable phenomenon. We forget that truth is a tool. It is the hook upon which we hang our deeds and the bed from which we rise each day. To assume that death is the end is to assume that our being extends no further than the physical substrate that carries us. This assumption does not account for the way in which we experience being alive, nor does it sit comfortably aside the fact that we are not yet able to comprehend the way in which our being manifests itself from the flesh and bone that binds us. I believe that those gaps in our understanding are still wide enough to cast doubt on such conclusions. I believe that those gaps are yet wide enough for our souls to fit through and drift onwards into some new realm.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. A ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. A hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad, daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. Always on the brink of somewhere. Each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river. Dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us. Baptized in ball pits. A clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please. Say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers, see what I say, just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. I think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host, who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
Good morning. Good morning. This is the first Friday of the month, Bridges of Meaning, Discord question and answer. There is a link in the show notes if there's still time, if you want to ask a question. Not a lot of questions this week. That might be a good or a bad thing, because if I get through the questions quickly or I run out of them, then I just open it up and we just take questions from the Hive Mind, which is the live chat scroll, or you come onto the screen when I drop the link and then we chat. So that is what we're doing today. Chad's poetry, I think that is that, and Chris Peckow's one that I used, the nice little 30-second piece. I think that 30-second branding, I'll often use that just at the end because of the way I put together videos. Sometimes I don't use any branding at all because it's because of the way Bandicoot works, which is how I usually assemble my videos. But sometimes if I have to basically compile the video, then I will put branding in, and I'll usually use that one at the end because it's a nice little 30-second bumper. But Chad's poem, wow, it's got the Hollywood iconostasis, it's got the Chad old-timey music, it's got the Chad transparency. I think, to me, that is the best branding that's out there. So yeah, although I do like, I don't know if Chad wrote the song that Gavin sings or not. I really like that one too. That's a good one too. But anyway, we are here today, and can I talk you into attending Orthodox Divine Liturgy in Yosemite on November 9 at 11 a.m.? No, I will, in fact, on November, that weekend, I will be in Washington State helping to launch the new Bellingham estuary with President Foxman. And for those of you, I'm a little worried about that estuary already because I'm afraid it's going to get big. Because if you've listened in the No Wait, No Ads to my conversation with Upcycle is going to be at the Bellingham estuary. And if there's anything I know about this corner, maybe some people will come out to see PVK, but if Upcycle or Grim Grizz or Chad the Alcoholic or Luke Thompson or one of the really important people in the corner are there, that really draws the crowd. So yeah, it's going to be a big deal up there in Bellingham. Now, some of you might notice that the camera is moving itself sometime, so I am playing around with other gizmos because I get a little picky about, and Grim Grizz knows this, your head needs to be, we have all been conditioned by set, and your head needs to be right in the right place. And this camera will follow me if it behaves, if it submits, but our technology is of the devil sometimes and not wanting to submit. But we are not here to hear me ramble, although that is usually what happens. We are here for the question and answer, and the first one that comes in this week is from our own Pete K, who has his own ship in the flotilla of strange theology, and he asks, what is the communion of the saints? Well, if you, let's see, shall we open a new, the Apostles' Creed. There it is. The Apostles' Creed. That should just give me the Apostles' Creed. It's really interesting. I believe in the Holy Catholic Church. I believe in the Holy Spirit. So the Apostles' Creed as a Trinitarian structure, hate to break it to you. I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. There's the first. And in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. There's the second. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints. It's right there in the Apostles' Creed. And what on earth do we mean by the communion of the saints? That's a good question. And for a lot of good questions, you can give answers, but answers never do it justice fully, because the communion of the saints is something that is so foundational to what we are made to be. Human beings are these really strange creatures that are, we've got this, we are at the same time both more individual and more in need of community than any other creature we know. And that is a really crazy thing. We are both more individual. If you look at dogs, cats, monkeys, elephants, every other creature we know, their individuality, well, it's there, but the range is tiny. So I had to bring Rue down to Santa Rosa. She needed just a routine hip x-ray, and another puppy raiser in Sacramento couldn't make the trip. So she asked if I would bring Amber, her little dog, over. And so we had Amber, and so we had Rue and Amber in the house for a few days, and that was great fun because both have had the same training. Both are products of this same eugenics program that Canine Companions is running, and they're both black labs, and it's fun because they're a lot alike, but there's a little bit of individuality to each dog, but not like people. People are both way more individual and way more communal than even dogs. Dogs are very communal, but people are even more communal. People are even more in need of community than dogs. People, for lack of community, will end their lives. A dog may die younger if it lacks community, but a person will actively end their life without community. And that community has the power either to shape a person into the most amazing creature made by God, or destroy that person and destroy the community itself. And if there is sort of a dead reckoning test of goodness, it is in many ways this idea that we have of flourishing or fullness. I was listening to Rod Dreher's first chapter of his Divine Wonder book because I picked up the audiobook, even though I have the PDF. But we, right there in the communion of saints, I listened to Richard Dawkins say, we could put a man on the moon. Yeah, but can we establish a community on the moon? Human beings are so deeply communal, and we are so dependent on community. There is, I was having a little debate, which I never get onto in Twitter, but somebody said, you can't have community in a crack house. And I thought, boy, it's a really good point. And I have been in community with crack house owners, runners, who is it? The crack house bosses. So it was funny because one of my favorite homeless people used to brag to me how he used to run 2 crack houses. And, but one of the things that I noted is the quality of community among homeless people. And it's surprising. And I would dare bet you'd find a quality of community in a crack house and a quality of community in a country club and a quality of community in church. And now one of the things I plan on playing today is Mother Kirk's story. Maybe will I play that today? I might play it today. Might make it in a video because I was thinking about, I love the way C.S. Lewis addresses the spirit of the age in A Pilgrim's Regress. And so I listened to that this morning, and then I continued to listen, and we got to Mother Kirk, who I love the image because John comes across a chasm, and he's with virtue. And the great thing about C.S. Lewis's books is that I can read them, and then I'll go away from them, and then I'll come back to them having learned more. And now my vision of virtue, the character in A Pilgrim's Regress, is so much better, clearer than it was before. And I can so much better understand the subtleties and nuance of what Lewis is doing with the character virtue in The Pilgrim's Regress. And so, of course, they get to the Grand Canyon with virtue. And of course, virtue, think of virtue, virility. Virtue is like, let's go. We can do this. And John is a little savvy by now. He says, well, I don't know. And virtue looks at him and says, yeah, I'm not sure if you're manly enough to do this, basically. And so then comes this old woman, and she's Mother Kirk. And virtue looks at her like, she offers to carry you. That likely we should carry her, which so often in the world, when people sort of get past their stigma of church and their stigma of the communion of saints, they sort of back off, and they're like, well, I'll run a church. I'll do a church. I'll do a church right. I don't need any of that churchy stuff. And it's like, and then little Mother Kirk comes along, and little Mother Kirk says, I'll take you across there. It's tough, but if you climb on my back and if you do what I say, we can make it down and all the way up the other side. And they're like, well, who are you? Well, I'm a stepdaughter of the old man in the mountains. And oh, it's just fun. But then the evening is close, and Mother Kirk says, well, it's kind of late, so maybe I'll tell you a story. And then what she gives is basically sort of an account of the story of the fall, which is the account of the story of the Grand Canyon. So maybe we'll get there. But the communion of the saints, again, I've told this story, and I'll keep telling the story. if you look at Nate Heil said, yeah, Orthodox Church, they like to say we're like the early church. And Nate, I think is right. He says, well, they're kind of like the 5th and 6th century church. And that's a strong thing. And so, okay. And it's the liturgy, the divine liturgy. I mean, Orthodox Boomer Grandma just invited me to the Divine Liturgy by Yosemite, which sounds absolutely glorious. And if you talk to the Roman Catholics, it's the Eucharist, the Eucharist, the Eucharist. And if you talk to the Protestants, it's the preaching of the word, the preaching of the word, the preaching of the word. And then I think sort of the next phase is going to be the communion of the saints. And Clara did a great live stream this morning, and she had Corey on. And if you haven't yet met Corey, Corey is a CRC minister who is trying to plant an online church. And I just met him this week, and so I helped him get a little bump. You can find a live stream on my channel. So if you go to my channel and you click on the live tab, then you can get you can find me and Corey talking about his ideas about church planting. And then now Corey's starting to jump into some of the live streams, because when I met with him, I said, you really got to get to know the corner. If you sort of, that'll give you can stay as long as you want or leave as long as you want, but whenever you want. But it'll probably be worth your time in terms of learning the kinds of things that you might want to learn in terms of thinking about starting what you call an online church. So he's been getting into the stream and he's been getting into the flow. And someone made on Clara's live stream the very intuitive observation that Clara and Corey are sort of the first two professionals that are now sort of studying the TLC by slipping into the stream of the TLC, by launching a boat in the flotilla, but they are professionals doing so for professional work. Now, one might make the observation that, in fact, I did it first, because this has always sort of been part of but I've always seen the TLC in my video channel as just part of my ongoing personal education. That's really how it began, sort of same with Sam Tiedemann. So, but I think where we are right now, with the near complete disruption of our more organic supports of community, where we have, and of course, Grim Grizz's channel is full of this theme, where we have seriously destroyed our ability to enjoy communion with each other. We have seriously disrupted it. And we've disrupted it through our technology. We've disrupted it by, early on, what was that dude's name? There was a guy who was talking about knowing, basically, and I'm going to have a conversation with Esther Meeks Lightcap coming up. She sent me her book. I'm preaching on Elijah this week, so the Dutchman talking about Elijah and Ahab, but loving to know. I got a lot of conversations coming up with higher profile people, so that'll be coming to the channel. And so if you want to see them, the day that they happen, just join the membership. No wait, no ads. You'll get them then. But we have so seriously disrupted the ways that sort of the natural environment helps us to know and to commune, that I think this is the current need of the church. Not that the church doesn't need the preaching of the word and the Eucharist and liturgy and discipline and all of the other things that the church does. But I think part of the reason that the church continues to morph and change is sort of this room of requirement where, okay, now the church needs this. And that scales. And so I think part of the reason that the Orthodox and the traditional Catholics are having a renaissance in North America is because North America needs that. but I think we need the communion of the saints. And especially when I look at, and so when YouTube came around and when the printing press came around and when radio came around, Protestants were all over it because, oh, liturgy, can that really go on TV? You can watch St. Elijah's in Oklahoma City, and it's kind of cool. I've watched them a little bit. That's kind of interesting, but Orthodox Church doesn't really communicate on YouTube. And to the degree that sort of Orthodox are taking to YouTube, it's sort of a Protestant method. And you can't really have Eucharist on YouTube. Now, you can play along at home, but there's a degree of LARP in there, especially for Roman Catholics. I mean, that host that has been consecrated, that people are bending the knee to, you can't play along at home with that. You got to be in the room. You got to receive it from the priest's hand. Come on. Now, preaching of the word, Christian YouTube is full of the preaching of the word. Books are full of it. You can, these mediums of modernity, or media of modernity, because media is plural of medium. Media of modernity is full of Protestantism, and that's part of the way the world is enormously Protestant. And what we are doing in this little corner is experimenting in the communion of the saints. And when Clara's becoming a live streaming, StreamYarding boss. She's leveling up fast. Clara's the new hot girl of the corner. Now, when I say hot girl, I don't mean that because she's a female, because for a while, Raj was the hot girl of the corner, and Chad has been hot girl, and Grim has been hot girl. So, yeah, and people take turns being hot girl of the corner, but currently Clara is. And, you know, we'll see if Corey gets some traction. Maybe Corey will be hot girl of the corner. But I think what we are in the most anti-communal medium we have, which is the internet, we are sort of taking this devil's tool and turning it to God's good purpose. So, and that's what Estuary is for, because, you know, Corey, when he talks about his launch of online church, comes out of the fact that something that I had noted, that people struggle for a variety of reasons, and you can evaluate those reasons how you will. People struggle for a variety of reasons about whether or not to get together. And so we are training wheels in some ways, and that's why I never play branding in the middle, but that's why on one hand,
approaches are, that's where the alignment is between Grim and I.
Okay, so what is bringing down the fourth wall project, Grim?
A terrible spell, and part of that spell, the humans have the campfire circuitry. For whatever reason, probably because it. So like, the television engages that, and like that's when your tribal elders are passing on information and stuff. So like those things are hijacked and make everybody feel like they're audience. And like if you watch characters in series that do break the fourth wall, and that's what the fourth wall I'm referencing when I do it. It's the wall behind which you are audience and not a human. So
okay.
Hashtag paintball for Jesus, @GrimGrizz, hashtag break the fourth wall. Now, oh, shoot, that was one of the best parts too, Andrew with the bangs. That's one of the best parts of that branding. But I know the branding can get tiresome. Hate to say it, can. That's why sometimes I love joining the GrimGrizz stream when it's live, because I can play in the hive mind. And actually it works pretty well too if I'm working, because I can continue to work while the branding goes on, because you have to understand GrimGrizz's genius, that GrimGrizz is sort of the Eastern Orthodox corner of the corner. And you might say, what? How GrimGrizz? How could GrimGrizz be the Orthodox corner of the corner? He's got the iconography. He's got the liturgy. It's not Chrysostom's liturgy, but it's GrimGrizz's liturgy. And he's the one that's using the icons.
the catchphrase I say go to church. And what I mean by that is, in some ways, you have to engage in the human relationships around you. That's like the best way to go about that. You know, you have relationship, you have a family, you have some kind of community around you. And so that's the best place to go, because in some ways that's the place that will have this procedural aspect to it that will ground the other stuff. You know, it's like if you have to, you know, to help your kids with their homework, or you have to do this kind of really grounded stuff that has that's very little to do with the ideology. You get engaged in other people's lives, then it binds you in a different way, right? It binds you.
And then like my father would, he was going to church, and I wasn't really living with him, but he was going to church, and he would like kind of, so those are elements of this conversation. I got to go to church.
It's being part of a church is part of Christian discipleship. And in that word discipleship, there's this word discipline, which is, it's a discipline to go to church.
What would be so great about actually going to a church is like you start going to a church so that when you do need like to be prayed for, when you have something to be prayed for about, you have a place to just say that.
You're dead on right, Grizz, and that is what the church is for. To know and be known, to love and be loved, to have a place to go where people can pray for you, where they will welcome you in. And this is, again, part of why I want churches to have estuaries, because it is, I know that it is difficult in many churches for people to, in a sense, come in and bring their real self. And what I mean by that, people have to say what's on their mind, or you can't wrestle with them. It's like, so Plato, as John reminds us, is broad, so he's a wrestler. You can't wrestle over a screen. So maybe if it's paintball for Jesus, maybe it should be wrestling with Plato. Because, and in church, in a real space, now often it doesn't happen. I understand that, but at least there's a chance to actually have a relationship with grit. And that's part of why churches are local, they're relational, they're face-to-face, they're in real life.
Said about why would young people want to go to church, and I feel like I want to have some kind of dynamic message or something that if they do find some reason to come, I'm trying to fish, so I'm throwing bait and I'm trying to hook somebody. It's what Paul is doing too. He said about being evangelical, evangelism of some sort.
Well, fishers of men is the promise. Yes.
Yes, correct.
It's possessed. We did go to church today. I took communion.
I don't go to church to think or to rationalize God. I go to church to worship Him. Right? And that's, I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that. And afterwards, during coffee hour, we can all argue about the God of our understanding, right? Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that the wild twin, the thing that led to my sort of dawning to consciousness of Christianity, it was a 101-day vigil that I did in forest. And I went into the forest.
You don't have to go crazy. Yeah. You actually have to go, you have to humble yourself and do it right here, right now, right?
Get up. I like how Father Schmemann talks about it for the life of the world. He says it starts when you get up and get ready and you walk or you go to church. So you start those are simple. I get up. I brush my teeth, I take a shower, I put on clothes, I go, the things of life, and we're ascending up into heaven. You're
There it is. There it is. Communion of the Saints. Good enough. Da, 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 da. How do you sustain the religious centeredness of community? How do you sustain the religious centeredness of community, i.e., the always, in a world that demands adjustment and attention to perimeters, the now? How many times you say politics is the language of now, but religion is the language of always? Curious. Did you arrive at that through your own thinking or pick that up somewhere? I think that's from me. So you might give you reason to doubt it now. And, I'm going to have a conversation with Preston Sprinkle about this, because the Anabaptist tradition, and that's where Kingsnorth's talk was fairly Anabaptist in terms of, okay, we're going to have separate magisteria. The kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of man are separate magisteria. No, not exactly. So you have to take that separate magisteria, and then you have to look at the much more integral approach like Peugeot, or maybe the realism of Nathan Jacobs. So the question is, how do you not lose the thread? Well, the liturgy, that's how they're trying to not lose the thread. The Eucharist, that's how they're trying to not lose the thread. The preaching of the word, that's how they're trying to not lose the thread. Church discipline, how they're trying to not lose the thread. And communion of the saints, how they're not trying to lose the thread. Now, I think part of the reason communion of the saints is needed now is because of this propositional tyranny that our enthusiasm over modernity brought us to. And propositionalism got overheated, and that's why this personalism is so needed as a counterweight to the propositional tyranny. And there is in the liturgy, there is in the Eucharist, there is in the preaching of the word, there is also something in the communion of the saints where that which is not of the saints will destroy the communion over time. In that way, God, who is the house, always wins, eventually, given enough time. And we sort of assume that when we understand eschatology and what it means. And so, but because we are short-lived creatures and we don't have centuries or millennia to let the process work out, and we are little centers of the universe, as Solzhenitsyn said, we have to work hard at tracking and not falling into holes. And again, if you read Lewis's Pilgrim's Regress, sort of like Pilgrim's Progress, both books are all about a journey and avoiding pitfalls. And pitfalls take people out regularly. And if you understand that, you understand that the Christian, and other religions have it too, assumptions that this world is not the only life we have is an expression of deep mercy, because way, way, way too many people never get far enough here. Now, what that means when you talk about where they go, that's a difficult thing. And I'm not going to go there right now. But the centeredness of community, so we are all trying to navigate and we are all trying to orient ourselves. And so Peterson says, well, follow meaning. Meaning's not a bad one. Meaning, because in humanity we are fallen, but we also continue to have the image of God. And so in that sense, we're always this mixture, and we're always trying to navigate. And so we're looking for navigational tools. And again, back to Mother Kirk. Mother Kirk says, climb on my back. And I love the imagery of this. You just have this picture of this little elderly woman creeping up to a young man who's out on a journey and sort of lost in the world. and Virtue, who looks like a Chad because he's all muscular and he seems like he's just full of virility. And the Chad says, "Hey, follow me. I'll make you like me." And John's looking at him, and this little elderly lady says, "Yeah, you can't get past that canyon. You can probably get down to the bottom, but I'm gonna have to carry you up." And right there, I was thinking about AA and hitting rock bottom, because basically through Virtue, you can hit rock bottom, but you're going to need Virtue's going to have to humble himself and climb on the back of Mother Kirk if they're going to actually ascend the cliffs on the other side of the Grand Canyon. And we'll get to that soon enough. Okay. Michigan Man, what is the difference between total depravity and limited atonement? These are two elements of the canons of Dort, and these phrases are two summaries of them. Total depravity basically says that what I've already said, that all aspects of our lives are mixtures. Limited atonement says God doesn't send junk mail. Now, limited atonement is, people sort of all get their heads out of shape about unconditional election. But limited atonement is the trickiest of the 5 points of Calvinism, because basically it says that God isn't going to waste his efforts. Now, that gets tricky because you have to do an analysis of loss. And once you start getting into the question of an analysis of loss, you have to get into the question of eternal perdition, or let's say ultimate perdition. And again, that continues to be a live conversation in the church, and that conversation is very old. And it should be to no one's surprise, that conversation is very much alive in the corner. So, yeah. BBK needs to advocate that you are all totally depraved. You can figure that out for yourself if you pay attention. And total doesn't, again, mean you're as bad as you could be. No, that's a misreading of it. Total means that even your best intention, one of my favorite chapters in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life was where he begins to mine the fact that so often it's our good intentions that are masking devilish motives. We are super subtle, sophisticated creatures that even the best we do is tainted. Now, if you look at that too much, you can fall into cynicism, which has sort of the mirror error of that, which says that cynicism is basically the flip side of total depravity. It says that everyone else is totally depraved except me. Total depravity flips that around and says, there is no good in me. And what I mean by that is not that there is no good at all in me. What I mean by that is even my best things are tainted. And I need a little elderly lady to let me up on her back to face the Grand Canyon. So, can the way to hell be paved with good intentions? Yes. Pelagius was wrong. William Branch, such an interesting dude. TLC is great at parsing terms until it gets parsing the terms of its past. All right. Next question. Hi, Paul. Long time no chat. This is Andre from BoM. Andre was, have you ever played Tony Hawk's Pro Skater? No. I have. The TLC is the most fun video game I've ever played. I'll say that. I play Civilization episodically every now and then, like during the holidays. Jared might get me into Age of Empires 2, which is a good game. But my sons have long surpassed me, or Jared has long surpassed me in my ability to play video games just by virtue of hours served. And I wish I had the time, and I wish I knew some video games better, because it would help me connect with people, because sometimes people talk about a video game and I just don't know anything about it. So that's just a question of cultural literacy. But I've basically resigned myself to the fact that I am a boomer. I was born in a particular generation, and I'm happy I'm tech savvy enough to play in the TLC, because I think the TLC is the most fun video game I know. But I've never played Tony Hawk, so I wouldn't even recognize it. Indie Defense. Hi, Paul. What do you think would have happened if only Eve had eaten from the apple and Adam had completely refused? And so I'm glad you asked, because that is, in fact, what is setting up. Now, hopefully, Algo can be okay with this. Nope, not yet. Oh, you don't have that audio. Hang on. Let me play some branding while I have to fix this. What good branding? I'm not going to play branding. I'm just going to do it. This has got to come down. We're going to stop screen. We're going to create a new screen. I am going to hit the window cloud player to share audio, share a tab or screen instead. Edge tab, cloud player, share audio, yes, share. Here we go.
When they were seated, the old woman told the following story. You must know that once upon a time there were no
Can you hear it? Let me know in the comments.
Tenants in this country at all, for the landlord used to farm it himself. There were only the animals, and the landlord used to look after them, he and his sons and daughters. Every morning they used to come down from the mountains and milk the cows and lead out the sheep to pasture. And they needed less watching, for all the animals were tamer then, and there were no fences needed, for if a wolf got in among the flocks, he would do them no harm. And one day the landlord was going home from his day's work when he looked round on the country and the beasts and saw how the crops were springing, and it came into his head that the whole thing was too good to keep to himself. So he decided to let the country to tenants, and his first tenant was a young married man. But first the landlord made a farm in the very centre of the land where the soil was the best and the air most wholesome, and that was the very spot where you are sitting now. They were to have the whole land, but that was too much for them to keep under cultivation. The landlord's idea was that they could work the farm and leave the rest as a park for the time being. But later they could divide the park up into holdings for their children, for you must know that he drew up a very different lease from the kind you have nowadays. It was a lease in perpetuity on his side, for he promised never to turn them out. But on their side they could leave when they chose, as long as one of their sons was there to take the farm on, and then they could go up to live with him in the mountains. He thought that would be a good thing, because it would broaden the minds of his own mountain children to mix with strangers, and they thought so too. But before he put the tenants in possession, there was one thing he had to do. Up to this time the country had been full of a certain fruit which the landlord had planted for the refreshment of himself and his children, if they were thirsty during the day as they worked down here. It was a very good fruit, and up in the mountains they say it is even more plentiful. But it is very strong, and only those who are mountain-bred ought to eat it, for only they can digest it properly. Hitherto, while there were only beasts in the land, it had done no harm for these mountain apples to be growing in every thicket, for you know that an animal will eat nothing but what is good for it. But now that there were to be men in the landlord was afraid that they might do themselves an injury. Yet it was not to be thought of that he should dig up every sapling of that tree and make the country into a desert. So he decided that it was best to be frank with the young people, and when he found a great big mountain apple tree growing in the very centre of the farm, he said, "So much the better. If they are to learn sense, they may as well learn it from the beginning, and if they will not, there's no help for it. For if they did not find mountain apples on the farm, they would soon find them somewhere else." So he left the apple tree standing and put the man and his wife into their farm. But before he left them, he explained the whole affair to them, as much of it could be explained, and warned them on no account to eat any of the apples. Then he went home, and for a time the young man and his wife behaved very well, tending the animals and managing their farm and abstaining from the mountain apples. And for all I know, they might never have done otherwise if the wife had not somehow made a new acquaintance. This new acquaintance was a landowner himself. He had been born in the mountains and was one of our landlord's own children, but he had quarrelled with his father and set up on his own, and now had built up a very considerable estate in another country. His estate marches, however, with this country, and as he was a great land grabber, he always wanted to take this bit in, and he has very nearly succeeded. "I've never met any tenants of his," said John. "Not tenants-in-chief, my dear," said the old woman, "and so you didn't know them. But you may have met the Clevers, who are tenants of Mr. Mammon, and he is a tenant of the spirit of the age, who holds directly of the enemy." "I am sure the Clevers would be very surprised," said John, "to hear that they had a landlord at all. They would think this enemy, as you call him, no less a superstition than your landlord." "But this is how business is managed," said Mother Kirk. "The little people do not know the big people to whom they belong. The big people do not intend that they should. No important transference of property could be carried out if all the small people at the bottom knew what was really happening. But this is not part of my story. As I was saying, the enemy got to know the farmer's wife, and however he did it, or whatever he said to her, it wasn't long before he persuaded her that the one thing she needed was a nice mountain apple, and she took one and ate it. And then, you know how it is with husbands, she made the farmer come round to her mind. And at the moment he put out his hand and plucked the fruit, there was an earthquake, and the country cracked open all the way across from north to south. And ever since, instead of the farm, there has been this gorge, which the country people call the Grand Canyon, but in my language its name is Peccatum Adae. 3. The self-sufficiency of virtue. "And I suppose," said John sourly, "the landlord was so annoyed that it was he who invented the rules and the black hole." "The story is not quite so simple as that," said the old woman. "So many things happened after the eating of the apple. For one thing, the taste created such a craving in the man and the woman that they thought they could never eat enough of it, and they were not content with all the wild apple trees, but planted more and more, and grafted mountain apple onto every other kind of tree, so that every fruit should have a dash of that taste in it. They succeeded so well that the whole vegetable system of the country is now infected, and there is hardly a fruit or a root in the land, certainly none this side of the canyon, that has not a little mountain apple in it. You have never tasted anything that was quite free from it." "And what has that got to do with the card of rules?" said John. "Everything," said Mother Kirk. "In a country where all the food is more or less poisoned, but some of it very much less than more, you need very complicated rules indeed to keep healthy." "Meanwhile," said Virtue, "we are not getting on with our journey." "I will carry you down in the morning, if you like," said Mother Kirk. "Only mind you, it is a dangerous place, and you must do exactly as I tell you." "If the place is so dangerous," began John, when Virtue, who had been struck by the woman's last words, suddenly broke in. "I'm afraid it is no use, Mother," he said. "I cannot put myself under anyone's orders. I must be the captain of my soul and the master of my fate, but thank you for your offer." "You are right," said John hastily, and added in a whisper, "The old creature is clearly insane. Our real business is to explore this chasm north and south until we find some place where the descent is practicable." Virtue had risen. "We are thinking, Mother," he said, "that we should like to make sure for ourselves that there is no place where we cannot get down without being carried. You see, my own legs have served me so far, and I should not like to start being carried now." "It will do you no harm to try," answered Mother Kirk, "and I should not wonder if you find a way down. Getting up the other side is another question, to be sure, but perhaps we shall meet again when it comes to that." By this time it was quite dark. The two young men bade good night to the woman and drew back along the main road to discuss their plans. Two by-roads branched off from it about a quarter of a mile from the precipice, and as that which went to the north seemed rather the better, and also pointed a little backward and away from the cliffs, which John was anxious not to skirt in the darkness, they turned northward. It was a fine starlit night, and grew colder as they proceeded.
There's a little taste of Pilgrim's Regress. So yeah, it's Roger Marshall was reading that a couple of years ago and recommended it to me, and so I picked it up again then and listened to it for a while. I had read it years ago. I would say I probably didn't understand it that well, and as I said, the older I get, and so that's, to me, that's really the question of, well, I don't think it would have happened. Adam, because of the communion, would follow his wife, because how husbands and wives are. You know, it's very interesting that Adam follows Eve, Solomon follows his wives, Ahab follows his wives. There's a very interesting dynamic going on there, which is not disconnected from the communion of the saints. So Nathaniel Franco, yeah, he asked me to do something for him, and I said, email me, and I never got the email. So Nathaniel, I hope I didn't let you down in some way. I probably did. Can you explain more about what you mean when you say that natural and supernatural distinction is a modern one? So it was actually during the video creation that I did a little bit of looking, and reportedly the first instance of the word supernatural is from a medieval document called the Order of Zion by Catherine of Siena. And I was looking for it, but just because I was so pressed for time, I couldn't dig and find the actual reference. Jonathan Peugeot just did a video on witches. About 2 months ago, I was reading a book on the Enlightenment. A lot of the stuff that, like if you hit the tea grog, if you hit the tea grog button to get him doing what he does, because it's sort of all the same. Now, that's not true of his conversation with Neil, but it is true of T Grog in the comments. It's sort of like a little box that you just sort of hit, and the T Grog bot plays in the comments. That's all early modern. It's almost all early modern. The witch crazes, all of this stuff is sort of a smear on the Middle Ages. And that isn't to try to whitewash the Middle Ages, but this whole framing of the world is early modern. And that's just a historical fact. And you just go, and you can get at that if you look at Nathan Jacobs' conversation with Chris Firestone. You'll find that if you read a good book on, I'll pull up the book on the Enlightenment. It wasn't a Christian book, but it's all early modern stuff. And so this language of natural, supernatural, it's all early modern. And what's funny is that a lot of it is born out of, if you look at They Flew, a lot of it is born out of the here it is, The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness by Richie Robertson. It's a good book. I've enjoyed it. Oh shoot, come on. Oh, you stupid app. This Kindle app is sometimes a real pain in the neck. All right, I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. So I understand why we use it, but whenever you start talking that way, you are in a modern frame and you bend the knee to the modern frame. Thank you, Upcycle. Well, I only gave 5, so Upcycle's gonna Upcycle's gonna, those of you who want to go in the membership section and check out the base membership section, lots of things right there for you. And if you go into No Wait No Ads, you can see my conversation with Upcycle, which will probably come out either Saturday or Monday. It depends if I have time today to make a video for Monday. If not, then my conversation with Upcycle will go to the full channel. No Wait No Ads is sort of like an inverted purgatory, because everything in No Wait No Ads eventually goes to the full channel. Not everything in the Randos membership level goes to the full channel. So that's kind of a distinction between the two levels. But anybody who has No Wait No Ads gets access to the Randos membership content as well. So thank you, Upcycle. Really appreciate your support. So yeah, that's the reality of the natural supernatural framing. And that's why I think the framing it's useful as a shorthand in communicating with people, but I think it's super shallow. And I think, again, if you read C.S. Lewis's book Miracles, he sort of exposes that. Now, remember, Lewis was a medievalist, and so a big part of why I think Lewis has been effective as an evangelist is because he was able to effectively suppress modernist impulses and framings in us, at least temporarily, to give us a glimpse into something more. I think Peugeot does the same thing. So, all right, Grim Grizz, when I ask you what is the best question you got on Bridges of Meaning Q&A, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Grim Grizz's question right here. I mean, because he's asking about hierarchy, and that's a question about hierarchy. I just have a problem. I guess I have a problem with my internal hierarchy creator, because people want to know my favorite ice cream. They want to know my favorite food. They want to know my favorite question. I just don't work that way. So I don't know why. Michigan Man Sam, happy All Saints Day. Happy All Saints Day. How do you see grace in the lives of Christ followers you know? Maybe especially among those who have passed. Well, what do you mean by grace? My father died of a sudden heart attack. I see a lot of people who they fight cancer, they struggle with Alzheimer's, they struggle with Parkinson's. My father died youngish, 77, but he was spared a long, slow decline. I see a lot of people who suffer with long, slow decline. So that was a grace. It's strange that sometimes grace comes in odd ways. I see that often. You know, it's interesting. You know, Freddie's got his challenges, but Freddie has a capacity for friendship and relationship. And I look at Freddie as, let's say, compared to, let's say, some on the autism spectrum, that one of the most devastating things I see sometimes with people on the autism spectrum is their inability to have a single friend outside of their biological family. And I think, again, back to Communion of the Saints, friendship is one of the greatest gifts. Tolkien knew that. Lewis knew that. So after doing all these videos about alcoholism, someone recommended a movie. Oh, shoot. What was the name of the movie? It was a Danish movie. Another Round. Oh, I don't know. Favorite. Who's your favorite woman? Well, my wife is my favorite woman. Another round. Fascinating movie about first this. What I loved about the movie, it was a movie about 4 men who were buddies and friends. There's not enough movies about male friendship. Male friendship is in a lot of movies, but this movie was partly about male friendship, and it was really about they decide they want to try out keeping a level of 0.05 alcohol in their blood. And first it seems like a great idea, and spoiler alert, I won't spoil it. It's a hard enough movie to find. It is on Amazon Prime. I really enjoyed the movie, so thanks whoever recommended it to me. But one of the things that I liked about it was the male friendship in the movie. And, you know, I think that's part of, now Estuary isn't men only. My men's Bible study at church is men only. And it has to be that way because one man, when I didn't have the men's Bible study, approached the women, and the women's Bible study said, "We don't have a men's Bible study right now. Can I join yours?" And the women said, "No." Poor Howard. So we had to start the men's Bible study, and he's there all the time, and it's lovely. But Estuary isn't men only, and I'm glad for that. But Estuary, like The Corner, tends to be a male heavy, and I think men struggle with friendship more than women struggle with friendship. And men need friends. And so Nail Daedalus had it exactly right when he's like, well, I decided I was going to be Chad's friend. And he did. And, you know, when I was playing that branding of go to church, when there were the Hollywood squares with myself and Grizz and Tayo, who's the 4th one in there? I don't remember. Sorry. Part of what's so much fun about this, why TLC is the most fun video game. I should probably take some notes here so I know what to title this thing. No. Windows. Communion of the Saints, that's a theme. Friends is a theme. TLC as favorite video game. Let's see. I do have a favorite, I guess. Is friendship. And it's why, you know, this morning, so the way my morning goes, I've got to get up and, you know, connect with my wife and feed the dog and do a few chores. And then my wife goes off to work. And then I've got a few more of my chores to do. I've got to shower and get dressed and empty the dishwasher and clean up a few things. And it's like, well, I can listen to something while I'm doing this. So I was listening to Pilgrim's Regress and listen to enough of that. And so it's like, well, let's go to YouTube and see what's on YouTube. Oh, Claire's streaming. So jump on Claire's live stream. And oh, look, she's talking to my friends, and Luke is there, and a whole bunch of friends are climbing into the live stream. And so it's friendship. It's friends. And again, Communion of the Saints, why this is arising now, because this is what we need. And this is why the Estuary conferences are so important, and why when we figured, so I got the invitation to the next ARC. I still haven't decided if I'm going, and Grizz, no, it's non-transferable and I don't get a +1. So you're gonna have to find your own. You're gonna have to find your own invitation to ARC. You're gonna have to grift a lot of money to cover that. If you decide to go, I'm still on the fence as to whether or not I want to spend my time going, because I don't know if I want to spend all that money. I don't want to spend all that money to go and listen to a bunch of speeches. I'm willing to spend that money to go and sit down outside the big room where they're giving the speeches to talk to all the other people that went there. That's why I want to go. And, I maybe I should just go and hold perpetual estuary meetings outside in the lobby. I don't know if the organizers would get annoyed at that. Should I grift for that? To go and do estuary in the lobby of ARC the whole time? It would feel sort of like running a rebel resistance, but crash it. You can't crash it. They check. It is invitation only. It is exclusive. It's in London. It's in London in February. So you really want to go this time. Yes, you should. Yeah, I'm tempted. Maybe that's what I'll do, because that's what I want to do, because so many cool people are there. And then maybe that's what I will do, because they record everything. I can watch it on you. And the truth is, some of them I will go into the room. Peugeot's speech was awesome. I was thrilled by that. I'm thinking. Anyway, what question was I answering? Grace. Yeah. If we're entering the era of the communion of the saints, what will the forgiveness of sins era look like? That one's always with us. That one is always with us. The forgiveness of sins, that maybe that will be Judgment Day. The forgiveness of sins. Oh Lord, is there anything sweeter than the forgiveness of sins? Is there anything sweeter than the forgiveness of sins? I was listening to the writing of the big book last night, and there's a little story. There's some stories about the Rockefellers, because the Rockefellers are integral. Rockefeller Jr. was in there and told the story of a friendship that Rockefeller Jr. had with a guy. And Rockefeller Jr. had lent this guy $135,000. And this was like at the beginning of the 20th century. $135,000 was worth like about $1 million today. And this was a friend from boyhood or high school or college. And the guy was a terrible businessman and he lost it all. And so Rockefeller had to write off the loan. But the person in writing of the big book said, this didn't in any way alter Rockefeller's friendship with this friend. Now, on one hand, you might say, well, Rockefeller was an enormously wealthy man. Yeah, true. But I have seen people not forgive far lesser slights. And so Jesus' story of the man who withheld forgiveness getting thrown to, the torture chamber, there are few things as sweet as the forgiveness of sins. Junker Shane. Many Dutchmen who emigrated to North America after the Second World War did so because they had collaborated with the Nazi occupiers and their neighbors didn't like them anymore. That's interesting, because so many of those Dutchmen came to the United States and they're like, our family hid Jews. Very interesting. I believe it. I totally believe it. People who emigrate do so for a reason. My great-great-grandfather, when he sent my great-grandfather to America, did so probably because he ticked off his Jewish community and had nothing left to lose. So let's go to America and try that. So yeah, I totally believe that. Did this ever cause conflict in North American Dutch Reformed churches, or did people just not talk about it? People just not talked about it, but I've told the story before and gotten into some trouble for it. So my grandfather was born in Western Michigan. My grandfather grew up in Grand Rapids. My grandfather took churches in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. And then in the 1950s, my grandfather had a very soft heart. And when I mean soft, I mean he was an incredibly loving, generous, kind man, patient. My grandfather, by most accounts, was a terrible preacher, which is a bad thing if you're a minister. His sermons were boring. His prayers were long and dull. I remember sitting around the table when they would come to visit us in New Jersey, And as is often, you open the meal with a prayer. And if you have a guest who is a Christian, so my father, whose normal job it was to open the meal with prayer, would ask my grandfather to open the meal with prayer. And so my grandfather would start to pray. And my grandmother, who did not have the patience my grandfather had, my grandmother was smart. My grandmother was a better writer. My grandmother would have been a bit more interesting preacher. My grandmother was a piece of work, but she had no patience. And so my grandfather would start to pray and my grandmother would sigh. Enough for others at the table to hear it, because my mom remembers. And I'm sure my grandmother's thinking, the food is getting cold. Can't we just have a short prayer? Why do you have to pray so long? So she's sitting there sighing while Grandpa is praying. My grandfather heard about basically what was happening in Canadian churches, that Canadian churches were filling up with Dutch immigrants who were fleeing starvation in the Netherlands. And I'm sure some of them were fleeing bad reputation. And so my grandfather decided to go to Owen Sound, Ontario, which career-wise was probably the worst move he could have made. Now, he was completely equipped for that job because what those immigrants needed was exactly what he had, which was not, necessarily great sermons on Sunday morning, but they needed loving care. And so that's what he gave them. I recently was contacted by someone who was a good friend of my aunt. She was the same age as my aunt who has now passed away, but she wrote a lovely thing about my grandfather, because my grandfather was her favorite pastor, not because he preached good sermons, but because he was so kind. And he was fluent in Frisian, he was fluent in Dutch, he was fluent in English, but because he spent so long in Owen Sound, the way it worked in the Christian Reformed Church back then is you usually spend 4 to 6 years in a church and then you move on to a better church. You sort of climb the ladder. But somehow my grandfather picked up a reputation, probably because his Dutch and his Frisian were both so good that maybe his English wasn't so good, which was hilarious because English was his first language. And so then he was sort of stuck in Canada. And my grandmother didn't like Canada. And my aunt didn't like Canada. And my father didn't go to Canada. And my other uncle was too young to really have probably comments or thoughts about it. And the reason my grandma and my aunt didn't like Canada was partly because these people just left the war. And today we have the language for it. These people were deeply traumatized, and they fought and they drank and and it was a pastoral care nightmare. And my grandmother was just sick of it. And so she wanted to get out. She wanted to go back to the United States. So then, fortunately, my grandfather got a call to West Sayville, Long Island. And my grandmother loved the city. She loved New York City. And the World's Fair was over there in Flushing Meadows. And so that was my grandmother loved that church. And so they were on West Sayville, Long Island. It was still pretty rural then. It wasn't the bedroom community it is now. But and that was a place that my uncle, the youngest of their 3 kids, finally put roots and became a police officer in Long Island. So yeah. Yes. All of what you mentioned impacted those. And the Canadian church continues to be distinct in many ways from the American church and the CRC. I was trying to explain meta-modern the other day and used a season of This Old House as an analogy. It is an effort to combine the charm of tradition and the convenience of modernity. Oh, excellent, Neil. Excellent. West Virginia Pilgrim. He's got a great conversation with me. It might be in the membership section. I don't know if it's on the open channel. It might be on the open channel. There's a period of explaining to the owners the trade-offs, postmodern, then the balance provided by accepting the results. That makes perfect sense. That's a terrific analogy. That is meta-modern. That is excellent. A picture's worth 1,000 words. What is Apostles' Creed and whence does it come? If you actually, I treated it in a sermon, and I might have treated it in a video, Grizz. The Apostles' Creed is a very early creed, and we don't exactly know for sure from whom it arose. There's a wonderful story that is, I'd say, I don't want to use the M word for it, but I'm going to say a universal history story, that what happens in the day of Pentecost is that each of the apostles sort of spontaneously recites a line, and it all gets written down, and that's the Apostles' Creed. But no, it's not quite that old. It's probably, it might be 2nd or 3rd century. There might be some precursors. You know, part of what I got really frustrated by in the Dawkins, Peterson, Alex O'Connor talk was that they start down this very interesting vein about the relationship between divine revelation and, let's say, Darwinian emergence. Now, I am not going to say Darwinian emergence is divine revelation, but there's a degree of God number oneness in that process. In some ways, a way to understand God number one and God number two is God number one comes from below and God number two comes from above. So the Apostles' Creed emerges, but I think in many ways it is also inspired. Now, it is a creed and not scripture. So as a Protestant, I'll put it a step down, but it's a very early creed of the Christian church and one of the most universal, compact expression in propositional form of the Christian faith. That's what it is. And many churches recite it. Okay. Wow, we're doing great on time today. Not a lot of questions. And I've been a little bit more. I know William Branch. I know I've been a little all over the map. I am ADHD. Yeah, I admit it. But I've tried to be a little more focused today. Ambrose is on the mystery. Chapter 9 speaks of the sacraments contrary to nature. Yes, that's there. So, but supernatural has an element to it. And see, this word nature is not as simple, few words are, as we imagine them to be. And you see the ambiguities all over the place, because all of these reductive materialists, when they say there's nothing supernatural, but they would say that climate change is unnatural because it's man-made, by definition, they exclude humanity from nature, even while they're saying humanity is completely the product of nature. And so this is C.S. Lewis's point in The Abolition of Man. They can't hold to their story, because they keep putting human. Every time you go to a supermarket and you see all natural, what on earth do they mean? Is human technology unnatural? Well, what they say is that human technology is outside of nature. So what have they done to the definition of nature? Then when you say supernatural, and this is exactly why that moment in the conversation, they hit on it, because suddenly Dawkins is getting a vision for actually what Jordan Peterson has been contributing, which is in many ways bringing God number one back into the conversation. Now, if it's all God number one, you wind up with the Tower of Babel. And if it's all God number one, basically you wind up with following the old lady down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, but not being able to get back up. Just taking notes so I know how to title. So nature is a very tricky word. And part of the reason that Ambrose will say that is because the Roman Catholics nicely developed the nature-grace pairing. And I think that's a super helpful pairing. You have to remember that most Protestants are Catholics with some recommendations. And the Roman Catholic Church has been taking those recommendations for 500 years and quietly using them. And so that's what a Protestant is, or a Catholic with a few recommendations about maybe we should do it this way. And given the diversity in the Roman Catholic Church, which I find absolutely amazing. Yeah. Kumbaya-ing the stream. Oh, Matt. Oh, Matt. All right. Last question I'm taking this week, if it's a question at all. I can move almost anywhere right now. No wife, no child, little debt. Wow. What are some places that you would move to for a few years if you could? Florence, right at the top of my head. Sacramento. Joined Living Stones for a few years. Sacramento is a wonderful place to live. I think Sacramento is one of the best places to live in California. Southern California, if you can afford San Diego, yeah, but Southern California is Southern California. What's nice about Sacramento, I'll put in a pitch for Sacramento. Southern California, if you don't like cold, Southern California is better. Southern California has great weather. I can't knock it. Sacramento does have seasons. You know, you can see how I'm dressed, where I don't turn the heat on in church. But Sacramento is 2 hours from the Pacific Ocean, or less than 2 hours from the Pacific, depending on where you go. Less than 2 hours from the Sierra. 2 hours to Mount Shasta. 4 hours from Yosemite. 4.5, 5 to Sequoia National Park. Drive to Southern California, you can hit Joshua Tree. Drive north a few hours. I mean, Sacramento is ideally located for the West Coast. I-5 goes through it on one way, I-80 goes the other way. We have exactly the perfect sized airport. It's not massive like Kennedy or SFO. It's fairly new, but you can get anywhere from it without too many hops. Downside of Sacramento, allergies. I've never had allergies all my life, but the saying goes, if you live in Sacramento long enough, you'll have allergies, because air quality isn't great because we're in the Central Valley. But unlike almost the rest of the Central Valley, we are right on the Delta, which means that even though our summer highs can get up over 100, often the Delta breeze comes through and cools us down to a really lovely 70 degrees at night. And so even though you will get up to 100, you'll only have that for a few hours a day, and it's a dry heat. We're not under threat of fire, although smoke can be a problem. The biggest threat that Sacramento faces is flooding, but the state of California has invested billions of dollars to make sure that Sacramento doesn't flood. And the retired chief hydrologist of the state of California goes to my church. And so you always know it's getting risky if a certain individual in my church starts parking his car or bringing his treasured possessions up into the church, because Living Stones is actually on a hill. And back in the day when they tried to make us pay flood insurance, he basically went to them and said, this church doesn't need to pay flood insurance because we are actually out of the floodplain, which is why the old orchard house was on this property. And when he is the one who actually bought the property for the church and selected it, he bought this property so we wouldn't flood. Didn't get in fast enough. I was going to ask PVK to take his take of the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 wise, 5 foolish. Maybe next week. It's a good one to start with. So, yeah. So Santa Barbara is lovely. Santa Barbara is lovely. San Jose. Silicon Valley. See, another thing about Sacramento is it's moderate. You have progressives and conservatives in Sacramento. You have nearly every racial group you could imagine in Sacramento. I've lived multiple places in the world. I think race relations are better. I'm not saying they're perfect. I think race relations are better in Sacramento than they are any other place I've ever lived in the world, including the Dominican Republic. Someone sent me a hilarious meme arguing that Donald Trump will be the first Dominican president of the United States. Hilarious. Sacramento is the Orange County of the North. Yeah, and so the reason I have to take these sips of water is because I take a little pill for allergies, and if I take that little pill, just a little generic one I buy at Costco, I don't suffer from any allergies. Day of rain, bad weather. So yeah, that's exactly right. Winter in Sacramento is we get some rain and it's maybe 55 degrees outside. Yeah, 85 degrees outside, bad weather. You get to be weather snobs here. I mean, people will be like, it's a little windy. It's a little windy. So, all right, this is what I'm going to do. Black Lives Matter in Sacramento. You know, it was funny. So not Black Lives Matter necessarily, but Antifa. Of course, Antifa sort of, really messed up Seattle and then Portland, and they thought they were going to continue making their way down the coast. And they came to Sacramento, and the district attorney, who was a woman, female Democrat, said, and lined up with a Republican county sheriff and said, you try any foolishness in this city and we will arrest you and we will imprison you. Guess what? They didn't have any trouble because they said, no, you can come and protest. Because part of the thing is outside the Capitol, which is here in Sacramento, every day there's a protest outside of the Capitol. Everyone sets up outside of the Capitol and does their little protest. And so Sacramento is very used to protests. And they know how to deal with protests. So they're like, you want to protest? Here's your space. Here's your time. Say what you want. But the minute you start breaking stuff or burning stuff or hurting someone, you're going to go to jail because the state capitol is here and they're just not going to put up with that BS, even though the legislature has their own problems. So Sacramento is a good place. All right. Well, thus ends the question and answer, at least portion of the show. And so now I am going to do the thing and drop in the link, and you can come in and ask your question. So since it's a question and answer show, come in with your question. And you all know the rule. Your face has to be on your camera. And I don't usually kick people off, but I would if you came in and behaved badly. The link is dropped. T-Grog, you want to come in and talk? Anyone can come in and talk. Anyone can come in and ask a question. It's a question and answer show, so we'll do question and answer. Click the stream. Yeah, you gotta T-Grog doesn't know how to join a stream. I find that hard to believe. So let's get ready to rumble. No camera. No, you got to have a camera. And it isn't just because we're avoiding the kind of stuff that poor Chad got pwned with. It's yeah. People also talk better if their face is in the game. And well, if nobody wants to talk, I got a lot of work to do today. So I'll doesn't have a camera right now. Well, there'll be other live streams. So maybe I'll play a little something, and if nobody jumps in, I'll go.
Fast Freddy G knows it all. That's my old name, G.
There we go. Whoop.
I had to save this.
Mark D. Parker.
You got a half-hour work still to do for these people. I got to keep it going until somebody plugs in.
So let's talk about Linda Ronstadt or
Linda Ronstadt. We could make an argument for Redlands, California. Redlands is one of the places in Southern California I would live. It's a beautiful place. Can't hear me?
a second. What about Redlands? I got interrupted.
Redlands is a beautiful place in California to live. It's pricey, but it's beautiful. I would live in Redlands.
It is, but it's also adjacent to San Bernardino. So it's it has, and San Bernardino is kind of the Detroit, California. So it's a little, we have some rough edges.
Detroit of Southern
as
California.
a result.
We've got Stockton up here.
Yeah, same problems, similar. Yeah. I'll put in the chat Humboldt. If you want to go to California, Humboldt is beautiful.
North Coast, the Lost Coast of California. It is, that's another great place to live.
Yeah, and it's truly rural.
So the thing about the Lost Coast is the southern Lost Coast, like Marin, super pricey. But once you get out of commuting range from then you have the economics. Then you have to figure out how to afford living there. And if right now via the internet, if you live on the internet, maybe you can do it. But that's another place that I would live. Joseph, how are you?
I'm good. It's evening here, so I'm off work, which is nice. Happy weekend.
Where is here?
Outside of London.
So should I go to Ark? What's the weather like in London in February?
I mean, come on.
I was there in August. I thought this is lovely. Then I was there in like October, and I thought this is grim. This is almost as bad as West Michigan, maybe worse.
Well, then you should try February.
All right, Joseph, did you have a question or?
I was actually going to ask you about ARC. So, and it's ARC in Australia also. So, have you been following that at all?
I saw that. In fact, there's videos coming out. So they did do something in Australia. So, well, what did you want to know about ARC?
Well, I have many questions, but I'm a sort of a tech guy. So, like, I think it's really fascinating the kind of relationship that ARC has with technology. It's sort of ambivalent, kind of. You have this sort of very fluffy kind of approach to it, whereas like we've achieved a lot during the in our civilization, and we have a lot to be proud of, and part of that is technology, right? It's like technology is the way that you grow the pie, and we can all be prosperous, right? At the same time, you have these particular pieces of like complaints about technology. You have like, oh no, I forget his name completely. But complaints about social media, for instance, or other things. And so it's like, but there is no technologists invited into ARC also, because all of them are too rich to go to this kind of conference. And so it's just it's a weird kind of dynamic there going on, I think, where it's like, like there's some good things and some bad things, but there's no like explicit thing. It's like, what Pichot said about, in his talk is like, there is this thing that's looming that no one's talking about. He brought it out, religion, right? But technology is like, no one has done that for technology. So I'm just saying, so there's my question for you is like, what should I do about technology? What should we do about technology?
I think the main problem with ARC is that they're misunderstanding what we need, because they are using ARC as a platform for promotion of information. You already have YouTube. You can listen to the speeches on YouTube. The reason you get people together is communion, interaction, relationship, dialogos. You get that many people like that together in a room, to have 1,500 people sitting there with their mouth closed, listening to someone on stage say what everyone in the room for the most part already knows and pretty much agrees with. I mean, in some ways, it's the same problem as a lot of Protestant churches. So I shouldn't talk this way. But And
I mean,
that's why
it doesn't hurt the Peterson brand. Let's get real. I mean,
well,
from that perspective, it's serving its function.
Well, the question is, what is its function? Yeah, I'd say you're right. I'd say I could understand what Jordan Peterson gets out of having this to be a success. But my question is, what is the success of these things? And when I looked at the caliber of people there, I thought, I want to talk to these people. And I don't just want to hear one person on stage talk, many of whom I have already heard talk before. Now, it was kind of nice being introduced to a few new faces and that was fine on stage, but I can get that on a YouTube stream afterwards. There's a lot of people whose faces and names I already know. I want to sit down and I want to have a conversation with them. So if I go again, I already decided I'm going to probably go to very few of the plenary sessions, and I'm going to behave. I am going to technology. I am going to sit out there and I'm going to run an ongoing estuary session. I'll see if we can do an estuary session, have it continue throughout ARC. So there it is.
Do it.
All right.
That's awesome.
All right. Mike Baumeister, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. First time in this group. Thank you for having me. Paul, I love to, this is the first time we're talking. I would love to talk to you. I'm going to be kind of in your area next week, but not actually. But I'll get cut to the chase because I don't want to waste everybody's time. I am a CRC person like you, and I sent you a memoir a while back. Didn't know if you got it. Would love to hear your comments. Would love to do a video with you one day or something if you're interested. And I can...
Wait.
A tweet was just too short.
You sent the memoir.
I'm a weirdo. Yeah.
I haven't read the whole thing, but what I read, I loved. Yes. Send me an email again. Let me know when you're here. I'd love to sit down with you.
Okay, that's great. And, you probably disagree with me on a lot of stuff. I would love to hear you tear that memoir a new ass. So whatever you want to do.
No, I loved.
Let's hear
it. When you come into my office, you'll see that I'm drowning in books. Now, part of the drowning is I buy too many. And the other part of the drowning is people send me books, which is really lovely. And I started reading your book and I really enjoyed it.
That's great. That's good. I don't want to make this all about me, but I want to give do some audio books so it's a little bit easier to digest because it's 85,000 words. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it to Sacramento because my wife and I are kind of going to stay in the San Francisco area and probably not get up there.
Okay.
But maybe I can just reach out to you and on these channels and have a moment with the
we should do it. We should do a talk where you can talk about your book, and I would like that. That's a good CRC thing for me to do. So
yeah, thanks for so much for your content has helped my family make sense of our past a lot too. Because growing up in that, I just grew up in such a confusing subculture sometimes, and I really appreciate the way you frame the evangelicalism kind of driving a truck through the CRC and the history, just kind of making it kind of incoherent for somebody like a millennial like me. It's just I didn't know what I was going through. I was like, I don't know what this is supposed to be, but I know this has to be the truth, capital T, and I'm going to be out of the family if I don't accept it. So
yeah,
I wish my grandmother were here to see that, but thank you, and I won't take any more of your time. So have a good day.
All right, Mike. I hope to talk to you more.
Right.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I love your book.
Thank you. Bye.
Nate.
You can skip me and move on to Alan.
Okay. Alan.
Good to be here. I just wanted to listen in to Mega Pastor Paul debating if he even deigns to show up to Jordan Peterson's event. So,
hey, Peterson's going to start doing randos.
Yeah. But I just wanted to jump in. I was thinking recently. I've been thinking about moving to Franklin, Tennessee, which I don't know if you were aware, but it's a very like cool Christian hub. That's where all the cool kids go. And I gets a lot of hate for that, but I'm willing.
Hair's pretty close to there.
Yeah, I'm willing to stand in the gap of the hate. But I live in New York, so I've been to the opposite place as well. So I know what it's like to be practically invisible. But yeah, just that phenomena of, so much of where people live is based on their career, and I think slightly with remote living, remote working, we're able to more choose where we live. So just that idea of like, okay, people have that, oh, well, I only live here because my job is here. And that's sort of like well, I don't have to think about it ever again. Whereas if you put that back on the table and you get to choose where you live, suddenly that adds a whole nother dimension. And do you go where everyone disagrees with you? Do you go where people agree with you? What how do you respond to that variable coming back into your control?
Was there a question in there?
Oh yeah, but just the idea of like, what, is it bad to move it to Redding, California? Is it, should you stay planted where you are? Should you,
Oh, that's a really good question. So I was just back in Whitensville, where if there's a place in the world that has the majority of my family, it's Whitensville. On my mother's side, my father's side is a little bit more split up. I have an uncle, my last remaining uncle, and that side is in Florida. There are other Vanderclays. The highest concentration of Vanderclays would be West Michigan, undoubtedly, in terms of from my great grandfather. I think we have underappreciated the value of staying in one place. I think there's a real value to it, and I don't think we appreciate it as much as it is. When I look at what I have lost by living far away from my parents, what my children have lost by not knowing their grandparents the way that my sister's kids knew my parents, there's a lot of loss there. But it's also the case that my cousins don't quite know what they have. So, and to a degree, if you're single, it's a good time to move around the world. Once you marry, have kids, it's a good time to not move around. It's a good time to put down roots somewhere, and best if your kids know their cousins and their aunts and uncles and their grandpas and grandmas, and that's, kids really need that. So I'd say when you're young and single, travel, live different places. When those kids start coming around, settle down, put down roots, be stable. That'd be my advice. Michael, how are you?
Good. I was thinking about the Kingsnorth talk, and a couple of things tied together for me. So again, coming from some strange leftist activist backgrounds, I can relate to a lot of where Paul Kingsnorth is coming from, and the temptation to have a certain kind of propheticity and activism that gets brought along, right? Now, I was at a little get together with some of the men's group from my church, and I was getting to know one of the gentlemen that I hadn't spent a lot of time with, and at one point he's like a teacher at a little private school. He's a Latin scholar kind of guy, and we were talking some church history things. And I had brought up Tom Holland. So one of the things that he said in regards to Tom Holland was kind of a critique. I don't think he's that familiar with his work, but the critique was the interesting part. The critique was something to the effect of, okay, well, if you get to that point to see that, you should, instead of rising in prophelicity and espousing a message, right, the more obedient thing to do. And he's coming at this from like a very ascetic-minded Orthodox lens, right? Like in deep reverence for saints that would go be a hermit, let's say, right? It's like step back and just localize. Now, I personally think that there's a lot of importance to that in my life, where it's like, instead of the urge to go stand up and rally a cause and rah, 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 like humble myself, get in church, be subordinate to my pastor, right? To be embedded in the community. And then another thing kind of ran in parallel with this, which was noticing the rise of Emily Jasinski, who is she's a reporter, journalist type. She does stuff with Breaking Points, the Unheard Folks. She started to do a thing called Undercurrents. She interviewed Alex O'Connor post Peterson Dawkins debate.
Oh yeah, Algo's been promoting that to me, and I haven't watched it.
So she's been interesting to watch evolve. She's unapologetically Christian, evangelical, but like kind of high church minded person. So tying this all together, and while on the cusp of what next week will probably be a fairly substantial shift in the world, it makes me contemplate the role, both from a personal and from a larger body of the church, in the Peugeot referencing Paul kind of way, and the analogy of the body is the role of us individually and communally when the earth starts to tremble here, as some of the titans do heavy shifting. And I was wondering what, like, your thoughts on that in regards to the prophelicity of whether of that body or of the individual versus the humility and the localizing.
You are right that there is, when Paul Kingsnorth did what he did, there was a degree of hazard with respect to a performative contradiction. There always is that. Yeah, I think what Paul did stands in the tradition of, it's funny, if you read, I remember starting to read Dominion, and if you recall the book, it begins in a rather curious place, because it begins with the Hebrew prophets. And I think that's exactly the right place to begin, because what Paul Kingsnorth did was very prophetic. The difficulty with the prophetic mission, Paul sort of, and he sort of inhabited a very Protestant approach to that particular prophetic word, in that I'm going to go into this room and that's an absolutely fine approach. I mean, I'm a Protestant. I don't have a problem with that. But I think your uncle had a point that the crazier thing to do is to be, as he talked about, it wasn't Ambrose, it was another, Saint Anthony goes out into the desert and they haul him out of his hovel and, talk to us. It's sort of like Forrest Gump when, it's just very Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump decides he's going to take up jogging and he runs back and forth across the country. And all these other joggers are, tell us. And he's this cipher. He just keeps jogging. And then, and then he stops and everybody's like, oh. So there, all of that is there. All of that is there. Now, I also, what Peugeot sort of followed up with me on Twitter and made the point that, and I think Peugeot is also right, that the irony to this is, let's say, okay, you're not going to hazard the performative contradiction, and instead you are just going to live a quiet, small life, embodying that prophetic resistance to the machine. you then become the seed of civilization, of a better civilization, but yet a civilization that will have all the same kind of, I love how C.S. Lewis put it in A Pilgrim's Regress. It'll have a little bit of that fruit in it. And that's the difficulty. And Peugeot, of course, was getting at that with respect to, Christ, Antichrist, Satan, let's say Luce, the new little doll. All of these things are there. And we don't escape them here in this dispensation. We don't escape them. Now, I'm going to say something about the election that I don't, and I'm going to have my conversation with Preston Sprinkle probably in December. But I remember Gore versus Bush, which, this is going to be the election that changes everything. And now we look back at Gore versus Bush, and it's like, they're two sides of the same coin. How much are Harris and Trump also still two sides of the same coin? I know a lot of people are going to freak the heck out hearing that, as they would with Gore versus Bush. And guess what? Guess who decided Gore versus Bush? The Supreme Court decided Gore versus Bush. And a lot of people make the argument that Gore won. So, people, I just want to tell people, push back from that political crack pipe, boys and girls, because the politics are often not anywhere near as damaging as everybody sucking on that pipe, which is, I don't know if I can remember a time in the nation when the nation has been sucking on that pipe as hard as it is during this one. And it's like, stuff is going to happen. Well, we want to make sure by voting, we're going to make sure that bad stuff doesn't happen. Good luck to you. So that's, and I know people won't like that, but I loved what Paul said. And there's a lot of other things you can say about it. And it's not the only point that can be made, but when someone with that much skill says a word that clearly in a room like that, I just can't help but get super excited and cheer him on all the way. But you're exactly right. The person, look at the story of Mother Teresa, and again, read James Scopp's biography of her. I've actually got I don't know why he asked me to put a blurb on that book, because I did not have that much visibility at that point. But here's a woman that is really convinced God hates her. And so despite all of that, decides she is basically going to do what is probably one of the most pragmatically ineffective thing, which is relieving to a small degree the suffering of poor people in a really grungy city. And the world beats a path to her door. And it's like, is it a good thing that the world beats a path to her door? And part of the reasons I always did randos conversations here is that I just want to give people a sense that saints are everywhere. They really are. Now, they might not stand out as dramatically as if someone is living in a hovel in the desert. In fact, in some ways, probably one of the strangest places to hide a saint is in some American suburb somewhere, and they have a car in the garage. But saints are everywhere, and we all make our compromises, or we all have our relationship with the machine, and it doesn't go away, and it won't go away. And of course, the question about, what about the New Jerusalem? Yeah, it's a city not made by hands. Then you have to get into that question of not made by hands. So no, and so and here's where people can resist the machine. Don't seek wealth. Don't seek fame. Don't seek to save your life. Just quietly take up your cross and follow. And if nobody ever notices you, just like the words of Joanne in my local estuary, just like the words of her mother used to always say when she saw something going on in that little beleaguered African-American community in Deep South during Jim Crow, God knows. You see that? God sees it. He knows. be content to let God take the people from the back row and whenever he chooses to. So that's my word. Good enough? All right. Buck was next. Buck.
Hello, everybody.
It's good to see you on share a live stream. I was so excited when you jumped in the other day.
Yeah, it was great. That was a really, really great experience. It just seems like a ripe time with all the AA structure and exploration. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay. You know, this whole mechanism of surrender through a 12-step process. I've been part of a Christian 12-step. It's Christ-centered that runs out of Paramus. It's called CARE. And
but you live in it's in Paramus, huh?
I live in Hawthorne. I live right next to
Patterson.
Patterson.
Hawthorne?
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
My grandson went to EC.
Oh man.
Yeah. So
wow.
I was in a Bible study a couple of years ago. A couple of my good Bible study friends they know you from EC. They're probably 4 or 5 years older than you, but they know you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're infamous.
Yeah. Well, my father was before the internet, a little bit famous in the CRC in that area because he always networked with the other churches to do some of the projects he did at Northside. So my father was quite well known in the CRC in North Jersey.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you said, it's a small community.
Yep.
But certainly bedrock for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I just with the AA stuff, and I just had to jump in. I've been wanting to jump in, obviously, for years. Always feared being annoying or stupid, or because you guys are all so smart, I can't keep up with half of it. But I guess the question would be, everybody seems to talk about the top-down, bottom-up dichotomy, let's say, right? But it just seems like so simple. It's like it's top down because the Holy Spirit works on people to work from the bottom up. Isn't that like how it works?
Well, there is a bottom because the top made it. You can think about it that way.
Right. But it keeps moving each person. I mean, I'm in a men's group. We had a thing called Conquer, which is a men's purity thing. It was kind of corny and stuff like that, but I saw 75 guys of absolute, top to bottom spectrum of people, Spanish, Black, Asian, 70 to 25 years old, explore the mechanisms of the limbic system and how it works, and doing all the work, over a 10-week course, and lives were completely changed. It completely changed the whole church, because of the transparency that could be gotten through a 12-step like process. And I can't see it not just exploding in this whole, especially in this TLC milieu. It's perfect.
Not to see what exploding.
A 12-step like process. I mean, I wrote a thing called, I think it's called The Weight of Glory. It was a Substack thing, but it's just, I looked at the word kavod and meaning glory, and it's also the same word for weight. And the 12-step program is a program that helps you take weight off yourself, because the weight on you is what makes you want to get out from under it in the wrong way.
Yeah.
So we're going to start a, I think, 12 steps for Christians thing. And I know it's been done. I have a workbook and all that stuff.
There's tons of them around, but
yeah,
just because there's tons of them around doesn't mean you can't start something. Beings, this is what we do.
Yeah. It's sort of outpatient, get people into the thing. Just to recognize that we're swimming in addiction. This world is just, if it's not my 40 hours a week, 70 hours a week of watching TLC, it's working around the house or worry or whatever. So anyway, sorry. I don't know if that was even a question. Thank you.
Well, you asked about the top down, bottom up stuff. So that was a question. Okay. All right, Alex, what's your question?
All right. I'm going to ask my question and then I'm going to listen off camera.
Okay.
A few years back, my brother-in-law moved from California, and he wanted to find a church. he went to ours, like, no. So he was going to go church hopping, and we went with him, and we got to see the way other people do church and the way the other people do sermons. And I also got a chance to experience Bible study groups. And you attend different ones from different churches, and they also have a different feel. But my question to you is, because everybody, even though they talk about the same, the good news, the Gospels, the Bible, everybody has slightly similar and slightly different views. My question is, what is your take on the parable of the 10 virgins? Because I know that virgins, because I know that's, I've heard that many times, and everybody has a slightly different take on it. There's 5 that are wise, 5 that are foolish, and I'm always curious to hear other people's take on that. But anyways, I am going to hear it off camera.
Okay. Well, let's first look at the text itself. Let's see what this wants to do. Oh, no, don't take me there. Okay. One of the first things to see, it's in Matthew 25. And the context of the story is important, especially a chapter like Matthew 25, because it is within a book. Yeah, let's see. Let's see. Screen. All right. So Matthew 25. What are we looking at here? So it's one of the first things to do is scroll back and see where in the story this thing is, because the gospel writers know what they're doing. And you have all of these parables. But let's get over to the narrative and see sort of where it's located in the narrative. So Matthew 21, you have the triumphal entry. And also remember that Matthew is a gospel that is really focused towards the Jews. Now you have the cursing of the fig tree, cleansing of the temple, authority of Jesus questioned. And now we get this whole series of parables. And Jesus is in conflict with the rulers in Jerusalem. And so he tells some parables that are absolutely scorching. The parable of the 2 sons. One obeys and one doesn't. The parable of the tenants. The tenants are kicked out because he's riffing on Isaiah 5 and the parable of the vineyard in Isaiah 5. The parable of the wedding banquet, that those first called, they don't even bother coming. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. Oh my goodness. Parable at the resurrection, the Sadducees are testing him. The great commandment, love the Lord your God. So he answers that well. Whose son is the Messiah? So now they're testing him from a psalm, and then a warning against, now he really turns, warning against hypocrisy, woes against the teachers of the laws and the Pharisees. And then he goes into a very apocalyptic section where, and these are, you really sort of have to figure out what to do. And so it's kind of nice we have Peugeot here, who sort of gives us the, let's say, steady state perspective. But then you've also kind of got the narrative, kind of the 2 kinds of time. And so here you have a little apocalypse. It won't be known. See, and then when you get to the end of chapter 24, right before the parable of the 10 virgins, but about that day and that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven or the Son, but only the Father. It is in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. For the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. So who knows? Now, this, of course, launched for dispensationalists, all kinds of ideas about rapture and things like that. My My master, and then who then is the faithful and wise servant, who the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. Now, again, this is the same context of the conflict with the religious authorities of Jesus' day. And you've got to think about that. And this is tremendously revolutionary. This sort of ties into Kingsnorth's talk, because Jesus is basically saying those in charge are not faithful servants and stewards, and their rule will be overthrown. And their rule will be overthrown. 70 AD will come and will wipe them out, and it's going to be a mess. But is that a full fulfillment of it? Truly, I tell you, put in charge all of his possessions. My master is staying away a long time. And then he begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and in an hour when he is not aware of him, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him to a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. At that same time, there's like no transition. See, part of the problem with our Bibles, who have all these handy chapters and verses, there's no transition in the text between these. There's a story change, but the theme is flowing and continuing to develop that has been going from the 21st chapter. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. So now the focus sort of shifts on those who are awaiting the coming of Israel's God to Jerusalem, and they are waiting. So now, but we still have all of these tensions with these apocalyptic things. Is Jesus talking about what's happening right now? Or is Jesus talking about what is happening in the future? Or is Jesus talking about what is always happening? And I don't think you can eliminate any of those three perspectives from any of these. Now, they might sort of rise and fall depending on a bunch of different things, but they are all there. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, and see, this is sort of turn the other cheek, give no thought to for today. That's all sort of the complete abandonment of everything. That's the renunciation theme. But this is the shopkeeper theme. And it's very interesting. You get a little further in the New Testament and you get into the Apostle Paul and, well, who should be an overseer of a church? The Apostle Paul gives this list. And the list are all shopkeeper values. So Jesus keeps going from these, live out in the desert and renounce everything and the birds of the air and be like Elijah by the stream. But then sometimes he switches it around and the shopkeeper values get the ascent. The bridegroom will be a long time in coming and they will all be drowsy and fell asleep. So there's a long wait. Are you going to be ready? That's that theme too. Midnight, the cry rang out. Midnight, the darkest part of the night. The darkest part of the night. The cry ran out. Here's the bridegroom. Come out and meet him. And all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish one said to the wise, give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out. And we say, well, shouldn't it be Christian to share? That's not the point of the parable. Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish ones to the wise, give us some of our oil. No, they replied, there may not be enough for both of us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy. And this is sort of, you can interpret this as people who say, well, I'm going to just sort of live the way I want to. And in order to enjoy the kingdom of heaven, I'll just sneak in under the wire at the end and be a good Christian right before I die. And how all those crazy Protestants say, you pray to forgive Jesus of your sin and this thief of the cross and all of this. I'm going to game the system. And it's like, no, there's no gaming the system here. This is not a system you can game. But while they were on their way to buy oil, the bridegroom arrived, and the virgins who were ready went into him at the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. And here's this vision of outer darkness. Later, the others came, Lord, Lord. Now, again, if you go through the Gospels, you hear, Lord, Lord, did we not heal the sick or raise the dead? Lord, Lord. It's always, Lord, Lord, open. No, the time is now. The hour is upon us. Apocalypse will take us by surprise. Be ready. So these shopkeeper, be ready values. But he replied, truly, I tell you, I do not know you. And that is sort of the kiss of perdition in these texts. Therefore, now you get the point. The parable explains itself. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. And if you go and you see, well, where did that theme start? That theme started a while ago. You don't know the day or the hour. So in other words, it's also a parable about how you manage time. And so, I mean, yeah, there you go. Quickie Bible study. That's what it's like to be in one of my Bible studies. Bing, bang, boom, no prep. So he took it off the air. So Michael Sartori, I always got to remember now to get that R in there. Michael Sartori, Gimli of the Corner. What question do you have, Michael? You got to unmute yourself first. Playing with that fancy mic. There you go.
Yeah, that one's not even hooked up. I'm here. I'm experimenting with a new location, so I'm in the back of my van.
Oh.
But the headphones don't seem to work, so I'm on the Bluetooth for that.
Oh, okay.
But it's good. It works good for recording the audio.
So you have a mobile recording studio now in the back of your van.
I just said I needed to figure out a way when I have more flexibility during my work day than with the
I am
kids
exactly
and
the
stuff,
same way. That is the way it is for me too.
Yeah. So I watched that video and the Paul Kingsnorth one, and then I watched your video on it. And since your little thing with Preston Sprinkle too, when that little thing came up on Twitter, so you mentioned a book, Christ and Culture by Richard Niebuhr, and I had grabbed a copy from the thrift store, so I read it on the flight to New England, and that like really puts a lot of once you read that, you're like, oh, now I can put you in a category and you in a category, and but I think, well, I don't know how much the question is, but it seems to me, I guess, that the problem, the conflicts that we've had before is that these different factions are all kind of vying for what is the right way, but it seems like they're all the right thing in certain contexts. We need some sort of a plurality of these different forms of Christianity and how they interact with culture. So
yep.
So what do you think of?
I think that's right. Right. And Richard Foster gets at it with his book on streams of Christianity, and you need the prophetic, because and part of the way this works then is different individuals embody the streams, different churches embody the streams, different eras embody the streams, and so reality is very rich, and these things sort of flow. And I think in 1 week before the American elections, and Nate picked up on it right away. Nate sent me that video. Algo was throwing that video at me like crazy. And the fact, I mean, if you know anything about the history of First Things, it was like, wow, this is rich, because of course, First Things, I read Newhouse's book when I was in seminary. I mentioned this in the video, and I read that with my mentor, my pastoral mentor, and my pastor. And I remember reading that book. It was an amazing book. I hadn't read it. And of course, he sort of launches First Things. And so First Things has sort of had this, I don't know, what would you say, Nate, about that? First Things has had an interesting trajectory over its lifetime.
Yeah, actually, David Bentley Hart used to write for First Things in its early days. And so First Things has kind of like changed its trajectory. And it was surprising to hear Paul's particular speech coming from that platform, because it has become, in its recent editorial direction, it has become very much a mouthpiece for a lot of like integralist and Christian nationalist kind of views. And obviously, Kingsnorth's speech was very much a critique of exactly what the direction that First Things is, which is actually to if they knew, I'd like to know whether they knew what the contents of the lecture were going to be before they platformed them. If they did, that speaks well, and perhaps maybe speaks to like maybe a more nuanced change of direction in First Things. I don't know, or maybe they didn't know, and there's going to be a horrific reaction after the fact. But yeah, it's changed. Like I know for example, one of the pieces that David Bentley Hart wrote for First Things in the olden days was actually a piece about. It's interesting too, because Hart's piece that he wrote on Tolkien's Christian anarchism, actually Tolkien vacillated between Christian anarchism and monarchism, which is right at that tension point that you were pointing to in your talk this morning, which I think was excellent. And I think the way you framed it, that these things need to talk to each other, is precisely right, because it's actually like Christian people that come from a Christian anarchist perspective and people that come from a post-liberal Christian monarchist perspective actually have like way more in common than either group does with people who come from a pure liberal perspective.
Yeah.
And what I noticed is that the conservatives who were freaking out about Kingsnorth's speech were mostly right liberals, not really conservatives in a classical definition.
Yeah.
They were mostly right liberals who felt their fundamental worldview challenged, whereas post-liberals were kind of able to like at least to accept parts of it as like definitely just speaking truth. So yeah.
No, I thought that was right. So Sandy, thanks for joining us. What's up?
I'm homesick, so I get to be here in live time.
Oh, I'm sorry you're sick.
That's okay. My question is still framing, but it's framing around several of the topics that you've hit on already. I did go through Kingsnorth's video and had several online conversations about it and particular points towards the end. Can you hear me properly, by the way?
Yep.
Okay. It seemed so. I wasn't going to start with that. What I was going to do is jump back to your question on Matthew 7, the 10 virgins, because it very much points to Messiah, is what we're saying, which is an anointed one. And what I'm wondering about in the context between Judaism and Christianity is whenever I hear it talked about in church, the focus is always in the fact that the oil's purpose is simply to keep some lamps burning so that the amount of time required for waiting will arrive and they will be ready when he comes. But I'm also wondering, an anointed one needs oil for the anointing. So are we saying that this is like if in the Jewish context, this is somebody who is coming to be anointed as king? And if Jesus is speaking into the Jewish context, why is there nothing that alludes to that? And how can we never talk about that in Christianity, about, what it actually means to be anointed? And
I can tell you're not Pentecostal, Tony, because we talked about it all the time when I was growing up.
So my ex, he was CRC, currently attending Pentecostal church at the time of our wedding. If all of the forms and functions were the things that guaranteed a good outcome, we should have been like stellar, because his pastor was a very famous Pentecostal in life and TV, and we were invited to go to Israel with him. And mine was a, quotes, Pentecostal Anglican, who was very famous for ministry in his area. Moving the aside. So back to Kingsnorth, my question then is, what jumped out at me, because I've never heard of him and I didn't really have a huge thought on him before I listened, was the couple of points, and I'm not sure if it was right in the last 10 minutes of his talk or in the early part of the questions, where he's talking about pointing to that place where the key is, there was two things: Christ in your heart and something else in your heart. I thought I wrote it down, but I didn't see it, which really to me, points back to the whole Judaism and the Messiah thing, because when the Messiah comes, this is going to be in the time where those final prophets have spoken, and nobody will have to teach another, because we will all have in our hearts, you know, the Torah, the word, everything. We will know. So I'm wondering, do any of our faith, the Christian faiths, actually speak to that in alignment? And am I seeing correctly that Kingsnorth is pointing strongly at that place, that our hearts are the key element of this, in terms of what the outcome should be, is that when all things come together and the Messiah comes back, or comes, depending on your take, we will be walking with God with, in a sense, as Christians, Christ in our hearts and love in our hearts, and it won't be confusing. It won't look like all this chaos.
Just at the
What's
end
your
of it,
thoughts?
you added a nuance, because you introduced sort of the question of a dramatic coming versus a slow coming. So you sort of switched from a millennialist frame just at the end of it. But I think the heart of your question has to do with the nature of Messiah. And if you look at the sermon I preached on David a couple of weeks ago, and then Solomon, David and Solomon get at, this is the standard. Now, again, if you talk to Yosef or Jacob, you will hear that, well, there are many different kinds of Messiah, and that's fair. What Jesus, I think, continues to dramatically address is the assumption that a Davidic or a Solomonic, that nature of Messiah, Jesus changes because he conquers in different ways. Because David, for example, takes the Moabite army and kills 2/3 of them, and he suppresses the nation around them. And that is the tension that is all over Jesus coming. And Jesus changes the script. Now, the church then will read. So what's coming in a couple of weeks from me will be addressing the passage in Jeremiah where the knowledge of the Lord is ubiquitous as the waters cover the sea. And again, Christians look at that and say, this is exactly the change of heart that Jesus brings. Because now, whether this change of heart precedes the second coming, as Christians would see it, or as a result of it, well, that's a very interesting conversation in terms of the apocalypticism that is pervasive in the New Testament. And something like the book of Revelation would suggest that that messianic fulfillment that we see pointed to in Jeremiah will be a result of the intervention. But you could argue that in different ways, because part of the trick of what happens in Christian doctrine is that you have two comings of Jesus, but the whole eschatological apocalyptic question means that that's sort of in tension, because what happens in the resurrection is that the new age begins. So that sort of leads to all of this question about these eschatological questions about the way it's quite clear to me that the way the kingdom comes is not primarily the way David suppresses the Philistines and the Moabites, and the way Solomon, and it enlarges his empire. And so now when you get the Kingsnorth speech, that's exactly what we're talking about. Because in many ways, this prophetic word of Kingsnorth says strongly, Jesus does not conquer in the way that the American or the British empires conquer. And that makes the American empire a little different too. And this is where we get into all kinds of questions about, well, how does empire function now? Because America has mostly functioned as an economic bully, every now and then bringing in the stick. But the fact that America is the superpower in the world sort of mitigates that. And you could argue that America is just basically a thuggish empire like everything else. And so to that reality, Kingsnorth comes in and says, yeah, but that's not really the way Jesus conquers. But then I bring in Holland, who says, well, but these Christian empires have done some good too. And so that then fills in these eschatological questions and questions of apocalypse. So all of that stuff is running through, and it's an enormous, nuanced, complex conversation that Jesus put on the table, because before Jesus, there was one way to have a Messiah, and that Messiah was named David and Solomon, and to a degree also Caesar and Cyrus and Nebuchadnezzar. And Jesus changes the script.
Well, I would say, Paul, if to our Jewish friends, in order to have the possibility of distinguishing different types of Messiah, those all to have to participate in something higher that allows you to identify all of them as somehow sharing in whatever this higher concept of Messiah that unites them all is. And I would say that's what Christ represents.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like Christ fulfilled the expected Messiah, but then went beyond it. And that was, they were like, well, we weren't expecting that, and therefore it seems like evidence that it's not the thing. And it's like, well, if it had been
fulfilled, the question of violence isn't completely resolved in the book of Revelation. And that's what's so interesting about it. And that's why I can't be an Anabaptist. I love the Anabaptists. I think they're an essential element of the witness of Christ, but I'm not finally an Anabaptist. So anyway.
I noted Matt in the comments asked if we forgot about Messiah ben Joseph, and no, I haven't in that thought, but I'm also thinking about recent conversations in the Jewish corner about the four craftsmen, and they're almost being like four different, like it's not just a combative two different viewpoints. And that's why I'm pondering, because I'm still figuring out, so what is God building here? Why is he building it? How do we all fit into it? What am I still trying to see clearer?
Okay. I think there's a connection between this and what I think it was Nate was saying earlier about C.S. Lewis's take on Christian anarchism.
No, Tolkien. It was actually David Bentley Hart wrote an article that was about the politics of Tolkien and how Tolkien vacillated between a sort of Christian anarchism and a sort of weak monarchism, where he would like, okay, I'm basically a Christian anarchist, but I would endorse this idea of an inbred, incompetent king as a mere symbol with no power.
Oh, interesting. Well, I have a variation on that theme that's a little bit different, where everybody takes turns. Everybody gets a turn in the spotlight, and those who use it productively for pro-social means get elevated to have more attention and a certain amount of influence, and you just bootstrap it. And I think that God is a bootstrapping thing. That I am is sort of being like, okay, first I am, and then a second later I am the I am that I just said, except I'm saying it, which means I contain it, and therefore I am bigger than it. And so I, layer by layer, like a tree, like a burning bush, become bootstrapping to sort of take on more of the nature of God. And I think that is maybe how we go from where we are now to sort of bootstrapping towards this oscillation between Christian anarchism, where we don't need that much governance because we have bottom-up virtue that most people subscribe to. And yet, to some degree, we have people who take the spotlight for a moment to direct, to create visions that people participate in. And
well,
maybe
to be clear, I mean, Christian anarchism is only a rejection of human authority, not divine authority.
Right.
That's what makes it Christian anarchism as opposed to mere anarchism.
Right. And so the argument is basically, hey guys, we wish we could do that, but what was it James Madison said? The Constitution works only for a moral and religious people. And you could say that, well, given that I think we would all agree we are not that, can we all agree not to follow the Constitution? But that is a very heretical conclusion. But James Madison thing points straight at it. And if we want to be an even more better governed people, we have to be an even more moral and even more religious people.
Well, I think
All
the
right.
idea, I think Sandy was actually really onto something when she started talking about the Torah of the heart. Because I think that's really what it's pointing toward. You don't need rulership if if the Torah of the heart is present. There's no rulership is needed. We're all ruled directly internally by God and participating in God. That's
All right, Hunter, did you have something you wanted to bring? I gotta bring this to a close because I got work to do. So,
well, I
not that this isn't work, but
honestly, the connection
I was
here
gonna
was
say,
really
real work as opposed to this work. Yeah.
other work. I have Sundays coming.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if we look at the Gospels, if we can identify a pattern of wholesome growth that can theoretically bootstrap and gain layers, and like a bit of yeast added to 3 loaves, hidden in 3 loaves of bread, it just spreads to fill them. And like a fire that catches on, it just catches on and it just goes until it's done. And like, why didn't that happen? Why hasn't it happened? The bootstrapping process is going on slower, but why doesn't it burst like fire, you know?
I think it does. I think it has. I think it continues to. I think that's basically the thesis of Holland's thesis in Dominion is that, hey, wait a minute. Why aren't we acting like Greeks and Romans? Something has burst on the scene.
Oh, well, it's completely transformed the world from one state to another, but it hasn't transformed the world from the state of the world to the new state of the world that it says it's trying to get. It says it's trying to create this harmonious body of Christ at the world level, that the yeast spreads to fill the whole thing. And that's the kingdom of God that's like that, he says.
Yeah,
and
why
this
isn't
is
it
the
here
will of
yet?
God on the whole earth. Huh?
And that's the part of Matthew I was just reading basically says you're not gonna guess the timing. The timing belongs to God.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I think the virgin story means. And maybe that's what I'd like to close with is I think the readiness that he's pointing at is pointing at this idea that look, when the seed is planted and it spreads slowly, generation by generation, over and over, but then there comes a moment when, behold, I come quickly. And we say that, why did he say that? Well, he meant 2,000 years later. If he meant 2,000 years later, why did he say it? Why would he say, I'm thinking about how I'm going to come in 2,000 or 3,000 or who knows how many years, and what I'm going to say to communicate this information is, hey, I'm coming back quickly, guys. I hope that doesn't mislead anybody. That would totally misled everybody if that's what he meant. Or it didn't mean that exactly.
Well, if you look at the history of New Testament interpretation with respect to that particular question of the timing, that particular thing arose partly when modernity arose as well. Because what modernity finally says is all time is the same. And if you read Charles Taylor, if you read Mircea Eliade, if you understand other cultures, you begin to recognize that there are lots of different kinds of time.
Yeah.
And so when we hear quickly as Americans, we think, what, like next year, like within my lifetime, and
well, like I should be going from city to city because it's going to be over pretty soon.
Yeah, so
exactly like that.
We hear all of this stuff through our own furniture as well, and so part of the reason that sort of a naive, I'll read the Bible for myself, Protestant way of reading has long showed its limitations, even among Protestants, is that language is this sort of shallow way that in some ways Richard Dawkins demonstrated in my opinion a I'm
not interested in
if I was a
Chinese.
colleague of his, I would be abhorred at how he
Oh,
behaved in that talk.
He was elegant as always.
I mean,
And
that's just how he is. He's
It's
always
fine,
been that
Protestant.
way, Paul. Have you read any of his books?
I haven't read any of his books.
He's always been this obtuse and this bad at
my one point I want to say about the virgins and the bootstrapping and the Christian anarchism is I think that maybe the pattern is that it grows up slowly, and then at some point there's a point where there's a connection that reaches down, and it comes quickly, and you have to be ready because you don't know when the moment will be ripe, when the anvil suddenly turns hot, and you got to. It's like saying, yeah, sometime in the next 10,000 years, that's going to turn red hot, and you got to hit it within 1 second.
And
So
it's
spend your entire
mysterious, and the Bible talks
civilization,
about that when the
being
time
ready
has
to
fully
pounce on
come.
that.
It's like, what does that mean? Go ahead, Nate.
I would just like to add this. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Ever since I woke up from my sleep, and I don't know if it didn't come to me in a dream because it was just the thought that was in my head as I woke up, and the thought was this: metanoia transforms the world. I mean, and that's all. I mean, if that's what you're looking for, that's the direction I would point you to. It's just like, as much as you can get yourself into a constant mode of repentance, then it will transform the world and will give you at least a taste of what you're looking for.
But insofar as that's true, it must be something different than what we've been doing.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's the point.
I would even say quite different, like maybe so bold. C.S. Lewis commented on this. He said, "Never forget that we are infant Christianity. These wasteful divisions. This is not the kingdom, guys. Like the kingdom is like exciting. It's like better than this, like way better than this."
Yeah. All right, Guy from I'm gonna get Ty from T. Grog's Estuary, and then I'll give Nate the final word because he might be here to say something.
My question's very fast.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out where I should move to. I'm the mushroom on BoM. So
yeah, Sacramento. I thought I answered that question.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about like, what if I move somewhere like weirder, like Algeria or South Africa, Uzbekistan? Like how far can I take it?
What do you like?
I like the mountains. Like as far as like where I am.
Or you like go to Tbilisi, Georgia, and hang around with Bern Powers.
Okay. Utah? Yeah. Okay.
Utah's lovely. Utah's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a Mormon, so that might be kind of a strike against me there. But
there are plenty of not Mormons in Utah and ex-Mormons.
So I've heard.
The convenient thing about the Mormons is that it gives you something to have a strike for you just by not being one of them.
True. I hadn't thought about that. And you're a little bit different, so you can always have some like conversation with people. It's a little bit adversarial.
Well, do you hate winter?
No.
Oh, the U.S. has lots of cool places. How about Maine? Maine is like the wilderness of the East.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of Maine up there that's nobody lives. Vermont only has 500,000 people. Vermont's a beautiful state.
Really? 500,000?
Oh, Vermont is gorgeous.
I might have to give that a go too.
Yeah.
Start sending out some job applications, I guess.
Yeah, Vermont. And Vermont was even given away. They were like, for a while, they were giving away like $10,000 if you'd agree to move there.
Oh yeah, same thing in Kansas, I heard. Like
Alaska. I'd still go to Vermont. Alaska. You got the dark to deal with, but
sure.
But Sarah says, "Tell me your favorite flavor of ice cream, and I'll tell you where to move."
Oh, geez, Rocky Road.
Oh, that's like the first thing Paul said. I was like, that sounds like Rocky Road.
All right. So if you'd like to give Guy from T. Grog's Estuary a recommendation of where to live, put it in.
Slack says North Korea.
Was that European Georgia or American Georgia you recommended?
European Georgia or Asian Georgia.
It's like Rocky Road.
I mean, it looks beautiful. I think it could be a little scary right next to Putin.
A little bit.
I thought about visiting Ukraine once, and I talked to people, and I'm like, would I need to be worried at all about Putin? I'm like, no, you're fine. And it's like,
yeah. Well, I mean, I met this girl that lived there. She'd like go back and forth between America and Ukraine, and she'd be like, we just hop in the cellar whenever they bomb us, and then we hop back out. So it's like no big deal. So, No, they're not bombing. It's like what, shelling is what they call it.
Do they say things over there like, you're more likely to die in a car accident than to die in a bomb?
I have no idea. But I didn't talk with her for that long, but it was interesting. Food indicates Pacific Northwest. Okay. Canada. One season. Okay. An oil rig. That could be fun.
The Alaskan Panhandle. That would be just gorgeous.
Puerto Rico, you can stay forever because you're an American.
Don't I have to speak Spanish? I could learn Spanish.
You could learn. You would definitely learn. You would learn a form of Spanish in Puerto Rico, like my Dominican form of Spanish. So, all right, Nate, you get the last word.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a question, right? So, a very simple question. Actually, I really, first of all, just as a way of introduction to the question, I really thought that your framing of your talk on the Kingsnorth speech was perfect. It really does. The important thing here really is that it does set up the conversation for all the right questions. And so my question was simply, I just sent out an invite to some folks who have slightly different perspectives and who I trust as conversation partners to talk about some of the conversations that come up in the wake of that. And I just wanted to know if you wanted to be included in that.
Sure. If I can make it in my schedule, I'd love to.
All right. That's it.
I'd be happy to. Maybe give us a little update on your health.
Oh, I am scheduled for a nephrectomy on the 27th of November. So they're going to remove my right kidney. They are not going to try to save part of it. They're just going to remove the entire right kidney. So the focus is to get my kidney function as good as possible before surgery. So I'm focusing on whatever's in my control to try to, get my kidney function numbers as good as they can be. And I may need dialysis after surgery because my existing kidney function is already compromised. And so assuming that it's usually people's kidney function is about 50-50 between the kidneys. So if mine is 50-50, then and my kidney function doesn't improve between now and the surgery, then I would definitely need dialysis post-surgery. So, and then after surgery, I'll have immunotherapy for a year. So,
but the idea is that hopefully that remaining kidney will take over the kidney function, and dialysis will be a short-term thing.
Well, that would be miraculous and the best case scenario, and that's what I would hope for. And that is not usually the case. Kidney function kidney function does not normally improve. However, I've beaten the odds before, because when I was first diagnosed with chronic kidney disease in 2013, I was at a stage 4 in my chronic kidney disease then when I was first diagnosed, and actually reversed the course of my kidney disease from stage 4 to stage 3A through diligent diet and exercise. So,
you know what you ought to, avoid like the plague is that Christian Science healing stuff.
Okay. I wasn't thinking about it.
Not a good time to take up Christian Science.
I have had some very well-meaning folks send me, more than one actually, send me videos about ivermectin, specifically treating renal cancer. So
wow.
Yeah, I have a friend who lives in Tennessee where you can get ivermectin over the counter, and it can't hurt to try. So
does
I might do that in combination with my immunotherapy.
Does Nate wish prayers for him?
Of course, yes. Prayers are welcome.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
all right. That's it. That was my question. I'll get out of here.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for all the questions on BoM, and I will drop in some branding. Oh, this is another one of my favorites. So here we go.
Where are you here?
Oh, there I am. Hey.
Where are you? Where?
Got me?
Oh boy.
How you doing?
Yeah, walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Come on, Dad.
Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Yeah.
Walk with my mama.
You walk with my mama.
Walk with me.
Walk with me too.
You walk with my mama.
Yeah.
Walk with me.
And walk with me too.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Jesus
journey.
I want Jesus.
Want Jesus.
Walk with me.
Walk with me. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. All along this Jesus journey. Hold my hand, Lord. And hold my hand.
Walk with Moses.
You walk with Moses.
Walk with me.
Walk with me.
You walk with Moses. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
While I'm home.
Yeah.
Jesus
journey.
I want Jesus.
I want Jesus to walk with me.
Say, walk with me, Lord. How y'all doing? Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
I'm on my I want Jesus.
I want Jesus
to walk with me.
To walk with me. Walk with David, a little shepherd boy. Yeah, you made him a great king. I know David shouted for joy. He walked with David, and he's a little shepherd boy. You made him a great king, and David shouted for joy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Gotta walk with me, Lord.
Yeah! That was rocking great, brother.
Oh, yeah.